Hello, and welcome to the Market Bull Podcast. Please note, topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial or investment advice. Today on the show, I spoke with Peter Allen, the CEO of Firebird Metals, which is listed on the ASX code FRB. Firebird Metals is an emerging West Australian mine developer focused on building the next major manganese operation in WA. Peter talked about his experience in mining and why he has focused over 20 years of his career in manganese. Peter outlined what manganese is, what we use it for, major players in global markets, and importantly, its use in lithium manganese iron phosphate batteries for electric vehicles. Peter highlighted the key projects at Firebird Metals and what strategies the company has in place to develop them. So hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull Podcast. Joining me today is Peter Allen, the CEO of Firebird Metals, which is listed on the ASX under code FRB. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here.
So before we get into Firebird Metals, primarily manganese exploration and development, and this is a topic we were just saying I haven't gone into detail as of yet. It's another one of those materials and talking points it's out there, but naturally everyone's talking about lithium at the moment. But before we dive into the company, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background and your history and what brought you to Firebird Metals.
Okay. Well, for me, tragically, I've been involved with manganese for like 23 years. So it's turned out to be a great ride. Like I've been involved with a company called Consolidated Minerals, who own the Australian and Ghana manganese mines. I ended up being in charge of their group sales and marketing and logistics. But then after that, I was involved with manganese players in Indonesia, in South Africa, in Ivory Coast, in Eastern Europe. So many different locations, many different styles of mineralization, and just different projects working on through to trying to get them through to completion.
So when you're saying 23 years, I mean, how did you even get involved in researching or even doing this? Because it would have been like, well, there's clearly other commodities and other resources to target. What drew you to manganese?
Look, it was really serendipitous. I applied for a role with Consolidated Minerals at a different role, and I ended up doing the marketing. Had no real mineral resource experience, didn't really know what manganese was, and so it's been a great learning curve from there. So, manganese is just one of those. Once it gets in your blood, it stays, and you love it.
So then if you're explaining it, because I'm unfamiliar with a lot of its properties and its usages. So if we're breaking it down from its basic level, what is it and where do we use it and why is it something that we need to continuously look for?
Okay, well, so the biggest use is manganese in steel. For every ton of steel, there's 1% to 2% of manganese. It gives steel its strength, its hardness, its abrasive resistance, and like depending on the application of the steel, there's more or less manganese in there. That accounts for most of it. That's a real long-term, solid base driver for manganese. It's unsubstitutable in steel, so it's a real solid ongoing demand flow from it. But the more exciting aspect is manganese now creeping into lithium ion batteries. Manganese has always been used in cathodes and alkaline batteries, but now it's becoming more and more prominent and important in both nickel-based batteries and lithium ion phosphate-based batteries.
Well, that's an interesting point there because I'm hearing more and more about, evolution in battery technology. And there's a lot of conversation about, manganese being used in that. So, I mean, where are we seeing all this really come to fruition? And if we're looking on the big picture, what is the actual setup for manganese currently?
So manganese gets fed into batteries in the form of high purity manganese sulfate, predominantly. So it's had a home in both nickel-based batteries before, like, if you think about NCM batteries, a nickel cobalt in for manganese. What a lot of OEM car manufacturers started to realize that while, how to make your EV more approachable and more widely acceptable to the greater market is to make it cheaper. And the biggest cost component in an EV was, the battery, and the biggest cost in the battery is the cathode. And so, they looked at how they can increase manganese content and decrease cobalt content and nickel content. If you look at an NCM 622 battery, while manganese is 17% of the weight of that of that cathode, it's only less than 1% to 2% of the actual cost. So they've worked out, without diminishing the capacity of the battery, without diminishing the range of the battery, they can reduce cobalt content, increase manganese content, and it makes the whole battery cheaper. And so, people like Tesla, Volkswagen, Stellantis have all made uh, statements saying that their ambition is to increase or go to manganese-rich batteries. Then the other side of the coin is like, there's always been two predominant battery cathode chemistries, a nickel-based battery cathode chemistry, and then a lithium iron phosphate battery cathode chemistry. And now even manganese is in LFP, so it's now LMFP. And the same logic increases, um, improves the cost base, improves the capacity of the LFP cathode, but doesn't diminish it, makes it just as stable. So, companies like there's a Chinese company called Goshen recently announced production of LMFP cathodes. CATL, BYD are also going into commercial production this year on LMFP batteries. So we see manganese, and through manganese sulfate, has a great demand in the EV revolution, regardless whether it's a nickel-based cathode car or a lithium iron phosphate cathode car.
And you could really say that's what's shifted the real talking point of manganese, because I can imagine when you first got into it, talking about it going into batteries for electric cars wouldn't have really been on the horizon. And now it's just become this, well, appetite that everyone wants, and now it's this quick and rollout process. So, I mean, feeding into the battery technology, I can imagine there's still a fair bit of research and development. But if we're looking at this emerging demand that's growing, I mean, where do you see that really elevating and taking off? And potentially, who are some of the big players in this industry already?
So I think, it takes time, as you mentioned, to go from like conceptual statement to actually becoming into full scale production. So while Volkswagen, Stellantis claim or made the statements they wanted to go into manganese-rich batteries a few years ago, you're sort of seeing batteries coming into effect now and all the way through to 2027, 2028. The forecast over these next few years is it's demand for high purity manganese sulfate is really go exponential growth over that time frame. And it's been driven, like I said, by all the large car manufacturers. It's not just one. Volkswagen, Stellantis, Tesla are also looking at doing it. And as I mentioned, then even BYD in China is LMFP.
And this is really setting the scene for, well, yourself and Firebird Metals. And I mean, it's an exploration company, tier one jurisdiction. How would you, well, I shouldn't say how, what is the company? And if you can explain a little bit about its process to getting where it is now, what is it all about?
Yeah, look, so Firebird's a relatively young company. We spun out of a company called Firefly in 2021. We did IPO and in species distribution. We through Firefly we inherited the Okover deposit. Okover deposit had a inferred resource of 64 million tons from drilling that was carried out 10 years ago. So we took that drilling. We've done an infill and extensional drilling. We've grown the resource now to 176 million tons. More importantly, we've grown an indicated part of the resource to 106 million tons. So we've got very good confidence about the resource. It outcrops, it's very shallow, forecast strip ratios are very low. So, we see that we've got a really good advantage in terms of, potential mining costs for the project, and simple processing costs. People will say, yes, it's a big resource, but it's only 10% manganese in the ground. I think what you have to realize is 10% manganese with 40% silica. Silica is quite an easy thing that you can then remove, like through crushing, screening, scrubbing, simple dense media beneficiation. You wash out the silica, you pull up the manganese, and you end up with a concentrate that's great for going into, silica manganese for steel industry, but also great as a feedstock then to go into high purity manganese sulfate. So, it's a great project in the sense of the size of the resource, like you said, the location, the proximity. A lot of European OEMs and are very interested in a tier one sovereign, a low sovereign risk project, and that's what Firebird offers these guys. So we're really excited by the development phases.
And I mean, we said it's in Australia and in Western Australia, but where more specifically, I mean, whereabouts is it in the region picture? And I mean, naturally, what always goes to my mind is, you look at WA and all these areas. There's huge, vast areas of just
Yep.
of land, and you go, well, where do we hell do we start, and what's the development or even infrastructure around it? So, can you give a bit more of a picture about where Oakover is and what it's looking like?
Yeah, okay. So look, it's as the crow flies, it's 85 k's east of Newman. So that puts us right near the Aboriginal Geelong Reserve. We're north of that. So by road, Great Northern Highway, Melville Bar Road down Geelong Road, about 150 k's away. Um, as I mentioned, so then, for the concentrate side, we'd be looking at trucking it to Port Hedland and out through Utah Point at Port Hedland. And then, we're currently going through a scoping study on high purity manganese sulfate. We made that in the lab. We announced that earlier on this year, and now we've been doing a whole heap of beneficiation and optimization test work, looking at how we can improve our process, and we're wrapping that all up in the next coming weeks and putting it into a scoping study, and we'll have an announcement around sulfate scoping study in the coming weeks.
Okay, and then I mean, clearly there's a lot of objectives to get done. You just said the scoping study, but I can imagine this is a project that's got quite a fair way of getting things done and accomplished. So where do you really see Firebird and yourself taking this project and developing it? And then, I mean, when you've got the crystal ball of looking at what comes next, and you don't want to
Yeah.
hypothesize too far in the future, but where do you really see the company evolving and growing into in that particular project?
Look, so the ultimate goal is the high purity manganese sulfate. I think that's the growing market. That's going to see significant growth, and it's going to continue to grow. And it's important to environment, EV, CO2 stories that everybody is aspiring to do these days. So where I see it, we're going to take it from from scoping studies into PFS studies. Look to try and develop this thing as fast as we can. Get the support of larger companies as we go. The sulfate side is a chemical process. Will have a little bit larger capex than just the concentrate side. So look for big partners as we go along and really look to meet that demand spike that's coming in 2027, 2028.
Well, that's where all these resources, and manganese is no exception. There's been an underwhelming underinvestment in exploration and bringing mines online, and
Yep.
now it's really this stampede of, oh, geez, we've got to actually find a good project, good resource, and start developing it. But it's not as simple as just saying that. There's a lot of steps involved, and I can imagine a bit of a team and a bit of experience. And you said you've done it for 23 years, but I mean, who else is involved in the team and the project and leadership of executing on the goals of developing this project?
Yeah, and look, I think a very key player for Firebird is our CFO, a guy called Wei Li. Through his family network, they've been involved in electrolyte manganese dioxide production in China. EMD, as it's called, is what goes into alkaline batteries. So, in his blood is, that whole manganese into battery side. So, he's got lots of connections in the lithium ion battery, the high purity manganese sulfate scheme of things as well. So, between myself on the steel side, Wayne on the battery side, we've got a really unique exposure and understanding of the total manganese market. And then we're just supported by a group of great guys, who are experts in their fields, from geologists to metallurgists to engineering side. We are a small company. We do look to try and have it through a consulting process. So all those key consultants are bolted onto us, and as we need them, we use them, and then just to keep costs and development as fast as we can.
And going flooding back to the area, I can imagine there's quite a lot of other companies. As you said, it's a hustling and bustling section, especially on some of those main roads. I mean, who else is in that surrounding area? I mean, is anyone else really exploring for manganese, or are you guys quite a unique spot where, I mean, it might be out there, but you guys are primarily focused on that because, everyone else is looking
Oh,
for
look,
all the other things?
yeah, no, there's a couple of other small exploration plays. I guess the most advanced is Element 25 with their Butcherbird project. Great news that they recently announced an offtake and investment from GM, and I think that really demonstrates that the interest in manganese today, and the even now large OEMs, those car manufacturers, are
Mm.
seeing that there's going to be a perceived shortage, and they're understanding that if they don't come down to investment, like in exploration plays, that the product's just not going to be there. So, then there's other companies like in the area of Black Canyon, Accelerate, etc. But I like to think that we're probably right behind Element 25 in the development process. We've got the resource, we've got the studies ongoing, we've got a whole heap of metallurgical test work behind us. So we're pretty much, I think, the next well advanced company.
Yeah, the point about car manufacturers diving into supply chains, it's really never happened before. say in the history of car manufacturers going, we need to get into the mines, supposed to be on the far end of the supply chain, which is quite a yeah, it's a different note, and it's not just well, one or two, it's all of them, and it's quite
Yep.
naturally exciting. I can imagine for you knowing that all these big car manufacturers, all these ones that are saying that they have ridiculous quotas to hit for EV, and we've already got a direction from government as well globally. It means that who knows what sort of opportunities are looming on the horizon. It's
Yeah,
quite an exciting bit.
exactly. And I think, there's been a market change in the last 12 months where, you know, there's always been that level of interest from those car manufacturers, but, now they've worked out what they have to do and they're actually, you've got that level of interaction and investment happening. And
Mm.
I just see it accelerating as we go.
Mm. I mean, going more into manganese and potentially why it's not as talked about. I mean, you might know primarily you get stuck in your bubbles and whatnot, being in a particular segment of the market. But do you have any idea as to why potentially we're not talking about it as much, or as it hasn't hit the main news flows? Or again, is it all that cycles of just lithium is that golden child commodity where that's all anyone really wants to talk about?
Well, I think it's partly lithium's got the buzz at the moment, and
Yeah.
people recognise that lithium went through those doldrums in 2017, 2018, and what the recovery and demand and price story that lithium has these days. But I think part of it is manganese has always been a little bit um, unloved in the sense, as long as I've been involved in it. It's not something, people understand steel, they understand iron ore, they understand stainless steel, they understand nickel, but there's not an easy way generally that you can jump on Google, type in manganese and get prices and get market information. So
Mm.
it's a little bit opaque in that sense. So, one of our big drivers is to try and educate people and get them to understand it and, make sure they understand those clear messages that it's a very key element in both steel and batteries.
Yeah, because that's the key point there is that saying that, yeah, if you don't have an indice or a big sort of moving average, then it's a little bit harder to get the traction and for everyday people to follow the price movements, the
Yeah.
demands, and what's unfolding.
Yeah. And there's not really just a, mid-tier or large cap manganese play. So, yeah, there is large manganese plays out there, but they're embedded in other businesses like South 32 and Val, just those manganese statistics. So
Mm.
I think juniors come along and on the back of the lithium ion battery, then it'll start to give people more um, confidence and encouragement to get into the manganese space.
And you were saying that you've got the Scopy study, which is planning to be completed in the coming sort of weeks or months. I mean, what really else can we expect coming from Firebird Metals over the next 6 to 12 months as this market really starts to hopefully get a bit more traction and people start paying attention to it?
Yeah, look, so last year, yeah, like so we started off, we upgraded the resource. Earlier this year, we upgraded the indicator part of the resource. Last year, we did a concentrate scoping study. This year, we're doing a sulfate scoping study. So once we've completed all that, we're looking at bringing the whole thing together and doing a total project PFS, looking at both aspects of the commodities that we'd produce and how it would come together as a project rather than looking at two separate parts. Yeah, we've got a couple of other little manganese tenements as well. We're a manganese specific play, but our next most noticeable tenement is one called Hill 616. It's about 35 k south of Oakover. So the idea being that eventually what we do at Oakover, we'll look to bring in Hill 616. Hill 616 also has a JORC inferred resource on it of 57 million tonnes. So it's a sizable deposit in its own right. But we think, it will make perfect sense to dovetail what we do at Oakover with Hill 616. Then we've also got another tenement called Wandanya, which is up near uh, a really famous manganese play called Woody Woody, up in the Pilbara region. Um, that has real great potential for more of a higher grade hydrothermal event versus, the massive resource body that we've got at Oakover. So potential to be much higher grade, but potential is a lot smaller than what we've got at Oakover. But yeah, so we're working on all these things and looking to bring them through as we go through the next year. And then just obviously, there's a whole heap of metallurgical test work that will go in to support all of these studies. So that's ongoing. Recently, we applied for our MLA, our mining lease application. We recognised quite earlier on that the long lead time in development is the environmental process. So 12 months ago, we started the environmental process. We've done our baseline flora, fauna, subterranean fauna, and water studies to support our studies. And now you have to go through 2 seasons. So, there'll be more of those studies progressing as we go along.
I mean, this ties into, again, being a small cap and having limited resources and almost a limited amount of time and ability to focus and really have you going all out on 100% on everything. So, I mean, from the boards and the management decisions, I mean, what sort of thought process are going into deciding that, you've got to prioritize certain ones over another? And how do you make sure that you're not neglecting, but staying on top of it because, limited resources is a challenge.
Yeah, well, and I mean, and that's the key. I think for us, we recognize that Okover is our largest resource, it's the most advanced resource. So hence that's why we put most of our effort into Okover. You know, like I mentioned, it's near surface, shallow mining, low strip ratio, all good things that will make it a very key mine. And then it's just a matter of, like you said, juggling the other aspects just to make sure that we're bringing everything along and developing everything and not missing anything as we go. But, I think, from a board perspective, we're pretty keenly focused on Okover. That's 90%, and then the other ones get the other 10%. But, it's, again, it's just, I think it's something that all juniors have to balance as they go.
And this is the other interesting point, and it might be a bit of an iffy question to ask, but I can imagine for you, manganese is the sole play. But as we're noticing more and more now, there's these tenements in these areas that, who knows, as soon as you start doing the research and the analysis, suddenly other materials start appearing. And I can imagine it's a nice feeling to have and to put in the work and find it. But then you go, well, yeah, how do you diversify and figure it out? I mean, what goes through your head? I'm not saying that's happening, but when decisions start coming and about and you go, well, what do we do? I mean, is there this trend now in companies whereby, if you have your focus, but you do discover something else, is it more of a tendency, given what happened with lithium, just to hold on to these assets and wait and see what unfolds in the coming time? Because, as you said, manganese has a run, then suddenly it's away, and then, there's a whole host of other ones that have their day in the sun.
Yeah, and look, I think that's part of it. And each company has their own strategy, but we're very much manganese focused, very much Okover focused. And it's that damned if you do, damned if you don't. But
Yeah.
we're big believers in Okover. It's a big resource. It's got the right sort of infrastructure nearby. You know, as I kept saying, it's on the ground. It's near surface. It's going to be low cost mining. So it makes the most sense and most what we think will give our return to all our key stakeholders is getting into that one and developing that one the most. And then we obviously see the potential in Hill 616 and then Wandanya, which we think we can do on the edges and look to add value as we go along.
Yeah, that's the benefit of, having a priority list of going, you've got to strategically figure out what you want to optimize and prioritize. I mean, if we're moving into this stages of manganese getting a bit more of a spotlight, and you've worked across a whole different bunch of jurisdictions, Tier 1, I mean, that's the primary focus of Australia and, without tooting our own horn, I mean, what's been so fantastic about, working on projects that are within, your own backyard as opposed to dealing with jurisdictions all over the world?
Yeah, look, I won't use countries' names, but I've dealt in some countries that there's sovereign risks are much
Yeah.
higher than others, and it's great to be, working in Australia, working in Western Australia. Western Australia is a mining town. People understands the process. The thing to have people understand the benefit of what your project can bring to the community, versus in other countries where sometimes it's less about the project and more about a wealth situation.
And, I mean, there's a lot gonna be happening over the next 6 to 12 months, and I mean, the objective and something that I find just quite curious is naturally a position like yourself, you don't really get a holiday or time off, and I can imagine it's quite a high stress and high intense role, you're not keeping everyone happy all the time, but, I mean, from your personal perspective, I mean, how do you manage, actually organizing and handling all these constant stresses and changes and, your daily routine completely being thrown out the window because, you're in an area where things are evolving and changing every single day?
Yeah, look, I just try and think that it's what every junior MD is kind of going through,
Yeah.
and I'm not the only one. But yes, you have some moments when stresses get a bit peaked, but it's just one of those things. You just got to like slow down. I'm a bit of a control freak. I admit it. Love to have lists, and like
Mm.
then that way you. I try and find that if I write myself a list, I stay out of trouble. But
Yeah.
what do you do? Yeah, it's just it's yeah. Again, I just think that I'm not the only person going through this. It is everybody else is struggling with the same thing. And when you catch up with other MDs and CEOs, you all can have a good laugh about it. So
Yeah. Well, because I think it's one of those positions that everyone just says you're the head honcho, but there's a hell of a lot involved in dealing with that. And you could say, especially these days, there's pretty unforgiving people out there, and it's a big role and a big responsibility. But at the end of that, you got to know how to handle your mental health and actually be on top of it, because it's quite a stressful role.
yeah, you're right. And yeah, I think everybody's a bit different. Um, you just have to find what is your release, and then just walk the dog, or
Mm,
whatever it
mm,
is. Just
mm.
just try and de-stress from.
And I mean, as you said, you've worked around the world. You've got a bit of experience from other jurisdictions and what's been going around. I mean, is that still flooding into your approach now? Is seeing what other countries and other areas are doing to develop these resources? Because I can imagine there's definitely areas that are executing it better than others potentially. I'm pretty unfamiliar with it, but I mean, where do you go to really source inspiration or even just get ideas? And is that part of that network you said with the CFO?
No, yeah, it's part of the network of the CFO. It's part of, recently I was in India. And, there's a thing called the International Manganese Institute. Throughout all my career, I've been involved in that, and it's great a way to see what other companies are doing, how the industry is developing, some of the challenges the industry is facing. So, that's a great way. But like I think it comes back to being in Australia and in WA. I've worked in countries where it's very difficult to organize things, to get things moving, and there's more of a constant pressure against you than for you in those countries. Um, so Western Australia's great.
Mm,
People understand it. It's a mining town. People, generally people want to see you succeed as a mine, because they see the benefits that it comes to the communities and your stakeholders.
No, great. WA goes without saying, and there's a few other jurisdictions where it does bring a lot of value. I can happily say that there's definitely some intentions that people don't like mining, but the realization is kicking in that it really is a necessity. Everything we use in everyday life
Yep.
is in part re- responsible because of mining,
Yep.
and these EV targets. And that was going to be my next point: is the other manufacturing potentials of manganese. And are there any other aspects of the market that manganese fits into? I can see that the drive for you guys is going to be tapping into the battery side of it, and that not withstanding that is a huge market. But are there other aspects that manganese fits into that we're using that we don't even really or we're not even familiar with?
Yeah. Look, manganese is in a whole heap of different things, in glass, colorings, fertilizers, uh, vitamins. But principally, the curve, once you get past batteries, um, you're talking very
Falls
small
away.
markets.
Yep.
So really the big two are steel and then batteries, and steel's very stable, and batteries has got the huge potential for growth.
Yeah, the battery market I see is why would you need to do anything else when there's clear direction? And if it's just starting to cars, then it goes into trucks, then I'm hypothesizing there'll be boats, there'll be planes, there'll be all sorts, and it's a huge amount of demand required, and we're sort of lacking on that supply front, which is why you can see there's a real drive to get out back into the ground, back into the hands, and really start evaluating these resources. And I can imagine technology has come a long way since you were originally looking at in the mining space. I mean, how much of a credit has that helped with almost reevaluating areas that may have been neglected um, first because we didn't have the technology or even the ability to extract the right materials from it?
Yeah, look, I think partly it's technology, but partly as well, it's like, no matter what the commodity is, people always tend to, or what gets mined first is the higher grade deposits. And, since, my career in manganese started, you've seen a steady and consistent dropping in manganese grades. It's throughout the world. And as you see, mines leaving, what is replacing them is mines that are coming up of a slightly lower quality, but, still through technology is being processed and finding its way to the market, quite successfully. And, you know, China is the biggest market for manganese and steel. And, 15 years ago, it used to consume a huge chunk of its own domestic production. But because of environmental circumstances, because the mines are getting deeper in the ground, the grade is diminishing. That has really killed that domestic market, and now it's being replaced by international seaborne trade. To me, that's just a general transition of the market, and you're sort of seeing it everywhere.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot going on. I'm excited. As I said, this is just my first interaction with manganese, but I know it's another one of the resources that's coming into the mix that we need it. And yeah, the information about the batteries, is big. It feeds into exactly where we're going. But for listeners and viewers that want to learn more about Firebird Metals and stay on top of what's going on in the developments and, well, yeah, just see where the company's going, where can they go and how can they follow the company?
Oh, yeah. So probably the easiest way is go to our webpage. There's a follow us little tab where you can put your email details in. They'll add you to our subscription list, and you'll get copied in on all announcements, all things that the company announces from there.
Awesome. And I've seen you guys on socials as well. So Firebird Metals and I believe the news coming out about the batteries, hopefully it starts tinking back into manganese as well, because these commodities have their cycles. And I can imagine for you, you're sitting in a position where, you love it. You see a massive need and or urgency for it. It's just about when the news flow ticks through and people start waking up. But I know there's definitely a large community of magnesium pro investors out there, and you find your passion and you stay with it, as you said.
Yeah, indeed.
But thank you so much, Peter, for taking the time to spend with me. It's been a great conversation. I'm looking forward to our next one in the coming months to see what's been evolving.
Sounds good. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow the Market Bull on our socials at Twitter and LinkedIn by searching The Market Bull. You can also subscribe to our newsletter on the website by visiting www.themarketbull.com.au.